The first sign was not her phone. It was a flower delivery that should never have reached my office. I run a marina in a town where people like to pretend the water washes everything clean. Boats, money, marriages, reputations. Everybody thinks salt and sunlight make a person honest. They do not. That morning, the hydrangeas arrived in a white box with silver rope handles, and a card tucked into the arrangement like a secret trying too hard to look tasteful. My assistant set them on the corner of my desk and smiled the way people do when they think your life is simpler than theirs. "Your wife?" she asked. I looked at the card. It said, "Thinking of last night. Could still taste the bourbon." There was no name beneath it, only a slanted line drawn like a signature that had lost its nerve halfway through becoming one. My wife, Lena, hated hydrangeas, said they looked like expensive weeds. She liked orchids because they seemed disciplined, sculpted, hard to kill if you knew what you were doing, easy to ruin if you did not. So I just stood there looking at those blue flowers while the marina office hummed around me. Radios crackled. Dockhands shouted over the whine of a pressure washer. A gull landed on the piling outside my window and stared in like it knew something. Before I tell you where this went, subscribe to Reddit Ride, like the video, and leave a comment. That support helps the channel grow, and some stories deserve witnesses. I did not call Lena. I did not text her a picture of the card. I did not play dumb or play angry. I slid the card into my desk drawer, thanked my assistant, and went back to the invoice review I had been doing before the flowers arrived. Fuel totals, slip renewals, a pending engine replacement on a 48-foot cruiser, owned by a retired trial attorney who flirted with every woman under 60 and tipped like he was apologizing for it. I finished the page I was on because panic has bad handwriting. Then I closed the file, locked my office door, and read the card again. Thinking of last night. Could still taste the bourbon. Lena was not a bourbon drinker either. She ordered champagne when she wanted to be seen and vodka when she wanted to disappear. Bourbon was for men who liked to talk about cedar notes and smoke and old money they did not really have. I should explain something about Lena. She was not careless in the ordinary ways. She was a planner, vice president of development for the city museum. Fundraisers, donor dinners, board politics, all of it. She could remember who was allergic to shellfish, who needed to feel like the smartest person in a room, who had cheated on his first wife and spent the next 15 years trying to buy back the idea of himself. She moved through social spaces the way good captains move through narrow channels, calm on the surface, calculating underneath. That was one of the reasons I married her. The other reason was simpler. She used to make me feel chosen. When we met, I was still building the marina from something half forgot and mostly failing. Rotten decking, bad fuel lines, insurance issues, 2 lawsuits left behind by the previous owner, and 1 hurricane memory, hanging over the property like a smell that never fully left. Lena looked at the place and saw what it could become. Then she looked at me and said, "You don't need luck. You need leverage." Back then that felt like love. Maybe it was, in the beginning. Maybe love and leverage only look different once things go bad. That evening, I came home with the hydrangea card in my wallet and found Lena in the kitchen cutting limes for drinks we were not having together. She wore cream slacks and a dark green blouse with the sleeves folded exactly twice. She always folded them that way when she wanted to look relaxed while remaining in control. "There you are," she said. "I thought you'd be late. I usually am, not tonight. We need to be at the Duval thing in an hour." The Duval thing was what she called a donor cocktail event when she had grown tired of pretending to enjoy it. There was always some version of the same room. White wine, local money, fake laughter, a tray of tuna tartare balanced like a moral test on the hands of a college kid in a black jacket. I kissed her cheek. She smelled like citrus and clean soap. No bourbon, no flowers in sight, no visible crack in the life we had built. I watched her slice the last lime and asked, "How was your evening yesterday?" "Long," she said without looking up. The museum dinner ran over. Then Nadine wanted to debrief in the parking lot forever. "Did you go anywhere after?" Now she looked at me, not startled, not guilty, just measuring. That sounds like a question. It is. No. "I came home. You were asleep on the couch with the television on and one shoe off." That last detail was true. I had woken sometime after midnight with a kink in my neck and a documentary about shipwrecks playing low in the dark. "Why?" she asked. "No reason." She held my gaze 1 beat too long, then slid the limes into a bowl, wiped the knife, and said, "You look tired." "I was going to say the same thing about you." She smiled then. "Small, polished, Useless. At the donor event, she was radiant in the way some women become radiant when a room full of people needs something from them. Men straightened when she approached. Women watched her with that complicated mix of admiration and private accounting. I stood beside the bar with a glass of club soda and watched Lena touch forearms, tilt her head, laugh softly at things that were barely jokes. I had seen that version of her for years, but now I was noticing the spaces between things. How often she checked her phone without opening anything in front of me. How her attention wandered whenever a silver-haired developer named Richard Vale entered her line of sight. How she seemed to know exactly where he was in the room before she turned toward him. Richard was the kind of man people called distinguished because old and vain sounded rude in public. Expensive tan, voice like dry gravel, widow for 6 years, on the museum board, known for buying waterfront property, renovating it beyond taste, and speaking at charity events as if generosity were a language only he had mastered. He stopped beside us with 2 fingers still around his scotch glass. "Daniel," he said to me, still making the prettiest slips on the coast, trying to. He smiled at Lena instead. "Your husband is one of the few men left who still understates his achievements. And you," Lena said, "are one of the few who still overstate theirs with charm." They laughed. Private rhythm, old practice. There are moments when jealousy feels hot. This did not. It felt cold, mathematical, and strangely patient. The kind of feeling that does not want a scene. It wants patterns. On the drive home, Lena rested one hand on the center console and stared out at the dark water flashing between buildings. "You were quiet tonight," she said. "I was observing. That sounds ominous." "It is." She turned her head. "Are you angry with me?" No, that was the truth. I was not angry yet. Anger needs certainty. I was not there, not then. The next morning I checked the museum's public donor calendar, then the marina's event bookings, then 3 months of our household credit card statements. I did it from the upstairs study, with the door closed and the blinds half drawn against a bright flat sky. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Suspicious husbands and dramatic wives were other people. People in stories. People without work to do. Still, I kept looking. There was nothing obvious at first. No hotel charges. No secret second phone billed to the house. No florists we could not explain. Lena knew finance too well for amateur mistakes. But carelessness has a cousin. Familiarity. And familiarity makes people lazy in narrow, stupid places. She had expensed a rideshare charge to our joint card on a night the museum had supposedly provided transportation for staff after a gala. The pickup point was downtown. The drop-off was a private address on Harbor Crest Road. I knew Harbor Crest Road. Everybody in town knew Harbor Crest Road. Gated homes. Deepwater docks. New money built to look inherited. Richard Vale lived on Harbor Crest Road. The charge was small. Easy to miss. Easier to excuse. But I flagged it anyway, then found another one 2 weeks earlier. Different evening. Same pickup zone. Same destination area, though the exact address was partially masked on the statement. I copied both, then I kept going. There were restaurant charges from places Lena claimed to hate. A valet fee on a night she told me she was too exhausted to stay out after a committee meeting. A liquor store purchase that included an amount so odd it had to be a bottle and not groceries. I pulled the merchant archive. High-end spirits, cigars, glassware, bourbon, I thought. I sat back in my chair and listened to the air conditioner turn on. The house gave a soft, settling creak somewhere below me. For a second I could almost convince myself this was not what it looked like. Maybe museum donors drank bourbon. Maybe Richard hosted board members. Maybe flowers got sent to the wrong office every day in some alternate universe where stupidity had rules. Then I found the invoice. It was buried in Lena's personal email because she had once logged into it on the home laptop and never fully signed out. I had not gone looking there at first. I'm not proud of crossing that line. I'm also past pretending lines matter more than truth once the house is already on fire. The invoice was from a framing shop, not a scandalous thing on its face. Except the note field said, "Rush order for study wall piece. Deliver after 6, recipient confirmed on site." Attached was a preview image of the piece to be framed. It was a nautical chart. Antique looking, the kind of tasteful masculine art rich men hang in home offices to suggest they understand legacy. Richard Vale had admired a similar chart in our den 3 months earlier. I remembered because Lena had watched him admire it more closely than the chart deserved. The delivery address was complete, Harbor Crest Road, Richard's house. Paid by Lena's card. My wife was buying wall art for another man's study. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. Not because the evidence was ambiguous. Because it was not. Because betrayal becomes real in ugly little domestic details, not grand movie moments. A framed chart. A rideshare. Bourbon. Flowers sent to the wrong husband. I heard Lena downstairs on a call, voice bright and capable, discussing table linens for an upcoming museum benefit. I closed the laptop and put my hands flat on the desk until the tremor in them eased. I did not confront her, not yet, a truth that big deserves room to show its full shape. So I made room. Over the next 2 weeks I watched and listened. I learned that Lena had a habit of leaving 10 minutes earlier than necessary for committee dinners, but returning either very late or exactly on time, never in between. I learned that she deleted text threads, but forgot that smartwatch notifications still echoed fragments when she was in the shower. Not full messages, just openings, enough to establish tone. Bring the folder, blue dress tonight. He loved the decanter. One message came from a saved contact labeled only M. For 2 days I thought M might be the affair partner. Then I discovered M was actually a junior museum coordinator named Marisol who had been helping Lena set up donor materials. Marisol turned out to matter more than Richard, not romantically. Socially, which in Lena's world could be worse. I met Marisol once before at a museum brunch. Nervous smile, too eager posture, mid-20s, a woman who had learned early that charming, powerful people felt safer than disappointing them. I would never have remembered her except for one detail. She wore fake designer heels with the brand name misspelled inside the strap. Lena noticed it too and said nothing then, which meant she had filed it away for later use. One afternoon Marisol came to the marina to ask about renting a small sailboat for a donor photo shoot. She was alone, sweating in the heat, trying hard to sound professional. I invited her into my office, offered water, and watched her eyes flick around the room until they landed on the hydrangeas. I had kept them after all. Dried now, faded, still accusatory. "You know my wife well?" I asked lightly. Her fingers tightened on the glass. "We work together. That sounds diplomatic." She gave a strained laugh. "She's demanding. Most competent people are. That's one word for it." The sentence hung there. I let silence do its job. People rush to fill silence when they are under too much of it in other parts of their life. Marisol set down the water and said, "I shouldn't say anything." "Then don't. That is the trick sometimes. Not pushing, making confession feel self-authored." She looked at me with the kind of dread that belongs to someone who has been carrying another person's secrets and is beginning to understand they were never being protected by them. Only used. "I think she's going to ruin me," she said. I said nothing. "She had me deliver things," Marisol continued. "Notes, gifts, reservation envelopes. Once a key." She said it was normal donor management. Then one night I realized I was covering for her, and after that she acted like I was already part of it. Part of what? Marisol swallowed. Her arrangement, not affair. Arrangement, a colder word, more revealing. With Richard Vale, she nodded. The office seemed to tilt a little, though I never moved. For how long, I don't know exactly. Since winter, maybe. Maybe earlier. She told me it wasn't my business. Then she started making me fix the schedules when they wanted private time before events. Marisol's eyes were wet now, angry more than ashamed. I didn't know how to get out without losing my job. Why come here? Because she's blaming me now. Something got sent wrong. The flowers, she said, if Richard gets embarrassed. She'll tell the museum director I mishandled donor outreach and leaked private information. I almost laughed at the neat cruelty of it. A whole affair trembling because a frightened assistant rooted romance to the husband instead of the mistress or the liar or the old fool funding half the West Wing. Marisol reached into her tote and pulled out a thick cream envelope. "I printed emails," she said. "Not all of them. Just enough that I can prove what she made me do." I looked at the envelope but did not take it yet. "What do you want?" "I want her not to bury me for this." Reasonable, human. At last something in the whole rotten setup was. I took the envelope and slid it into my drawer. "If what you're saying checks out," I said, "she won't bury anyone." Marisol let out a breath that sounded like she had been holding it for months. When she left, I locked the office door and opened the envelope. There it was. Not every detail, but enough. Emails from Lena directing logistics with a tone half managerial, half intimate. Messages forwarding Richard's preferences like donor instructions. Seating changes built around secret time. Gift purchases. One handwritten note scanned by Marisol before delivery, because Lena had dictated a correction. The note ended with, "Tonight after the committee walkthrough. Your study. Bring that bottle." I sat there with the papers spread across my desk, while outside a sport fishing charter backed out too fast and scraped a piling hard enough to make the dock ring. Sometimes pain arrives cleanly. Sometimes it arrives like a set of books falling off a shelf in another room, and by the time you reach the doorway, the mess is already old. I did not shout. I did not throw anything. I made copies. Then I called an attorney I knew through the marina, a woman named Elise Warren, whose brother kept his boat with us year-round and paid late, but always tipped the dockhands at Christmas. By late afternoon, I was in her office above a row of boutiques that sold linen clothes to people who did not sweat honestly. I laid out the evidence. Marisol's printouts, the charges, the card from the flowers. Elise read quietly, turning pages with the careful indifference of someone who has seen every way a marriage can rot and learned not to perform sympathy unless it helps. "When do you want to act?" she asked. "When does a man know enough? You know enough now. I want to know more." She nodded once. "That usually means you want it to hurt less by the time you move. Will it?" "No." I appreciated her for that. Then she said, "But clarity can keep you from doing something expensive." Over the next several days, clarity became my job. Elise had a forensic accountant review the household accounts. I changed passwords on the marina business system Lena could access through shared emergency records. I moved certain partnership documents to a private safe deposit box. Quiet things, necessary things. No drama, no midnight packing, no theatrical evidence board with red string across the den wall. Lena noticed none of it, or if she did, she assumed she still controlled the weather inside our home. She kissed my jaw in the mornings and asked about slip occupancy. She left dresses draped over the bedroom chair for me to compliment and seemed mildly annoyed when I only said, "Looks good." She told me which donors were tiresome and which event tables needed rescuing. Once she climbed into my lap in the living room with a glass of wine and asked if I missed her. I said, "You're here." She studied my face, trying to read how much I knew. Then she smiled that polished smile again and said, "That wasn't an answer." No, it was not. The deeper cut came a week later, not because I learned she was sleeping with Richard. I already knew that in every way that mattered. It came because I learned why. Elise's accountant found transfers, not from our household accounts into Richard's. That would have been too crude. Instead, Lena had steered museum vendor recommendations toward a staging consultant owned by Richard's nephew, then used the resulting donor gratitude and board goodwill to secure herself a promised promotion package that included a housing allowance and performance bonus. Richard's influence helped. So did private strategy sessions in his study. So did being available in the ways powerful old men often mistake for loyalty. This was not love, not even infatuation. It was ladder climbing soaked in perfume and self-justification. And that, somehow, felt worse, because an affair for desire insults a marriage, an affair for ambition auctions it. I sat in my truck outside the accountant's office with the file on the passenger seat and looked through the windshield at a bakery window across the street, where a little boy was pressing both palms to the glass while his mother laughed and tried to pull him back. Ordinary life, still happening, always insulting in the middle of private collapse. That night, Lena asked if I wanted to join her at the museum's summer preview gala the following Friday. Important donors, press, the board. Richard would be speaking. So would she. I wouldn't miss it, I said. "I'm glad," she replied, and reached over to touch my wrist. "I know things have felt distant lately." "Yes," I said. "They have." She waited for more. I gave her none. If she heard danger in my voice, she ignored it. Perhaps because people who lie well begin to believe truth is just another tone they can manage. Friday came bright and brutal, the kind of heat that makes even wealthy people perspire under their expensive restraint. By evening, the museum courtyard glowed with lanterns and white fabric and polished glass. A jazz trio worked too hard in one corner. The fountain lights made the water look staged. Lena wore navy silk and diamond drops I had bought her on our 8th anniversary after a season when we both thought exhaustion was just another word for building a future together. Richard wore a pale suit and the expression of a man who believed the room existed to confirm him. Marisol was there too, tucked near the registration table in a black dress that made her look older until she moved, and all the fear came back into her shoulders. I arrived alone but not unprepared. Inside the slim, leather portfolio under my arm were copies. Not every scrap of evidence, just enough. The flowers card, the expense trail, selected emails, the staging consultant connection, a letter drafted by Elise and finalized that afternoon. Not dramatic, not threatening, simply documenting marital misconduct, financial entanglement, and notice of pending legal action. Elegant ruin, paper cuts in formal wear. The event began the way such events always do. Clinking glasses, public gratitude, speeches swollen with nouns like community and vision. Lena moved from table to table, collecting smiles. Richard worked the donor cluster near the fountain, one hand always on a shoulder or glass stem or lapel, as though touch itself were a form of ownership. When Lena stepped to the podium, the room softened toward her. That was her gift. She could make wealthy boredom feel like civic virtue. She spoke about preservation, about history, about the duty to steward beauty, so future generations would know what mattered. I almost admired the nerve of it. Almost. When she finished, the applause was warm and obedient. Richard rose for his remarks. Halfway through his opening anecdote, I crossed the courtyard. Not fast, not slow, just enough purpose that people noticed without yet understanding why. He saw me coming and smiled with faint irritation, the way men like him do when another man violates the choreography of an evening. "Daniel," he said into the microphone with a chuckle, "have I stolen your better half for too many museum nights?" Some people laughed. Lena's smile froze. I stopped beside the podium and held up one hand, not touching him, not grabbing the microphone, only asking the room for one quiet moment with the confidence of a man who owns his next sentence. "Actually," I said, "you've both been using what was mine long enough." No one laughed then. The silence arrived all at once. Wide, sharp, Lena stepped forward first. "Daniel," she said under her breath, "not here. Here is exactly right." Richard's face hardened. "I think you may be confused." I opened the portfolio, removed one copy set, then another. "Then let clarity help," I said. I handed the first packet to Richard, the second to Lena. I watched them both recognize their own disaster in paper form. The card, the charges, the notes, the vendor trail, not all at once. One detail at a time, which is how shock does its cleanest work. Lena went pale first. Richard flushed. He glanced around, calculating who was close enough to see, who would ask questions later, how quickly a lie could still be built. "Daniel," Lena said, voice low and dangerous now, "we are leaving." "No," I said. "You're staying exactly long enough to understand something." Her eyes lifted to mine. For the first time in our marriage, she looked genuinely uncertain of her effect. I kept my voice calm. That mattered. Volume would have helped her. Chaos would have made this mutual. I was not giving her that. "You thought because I don't perform," I said, "I don't see. You thought because I work with tides and contracts and diesel engines, I'd never understand how ambition smells when it's trying to pass as love. And you," I looked at Richard, "you thought age and money turned this into discretion." His mouth tightened. "This is not the place." It became the place when you used her position, our marriage and museum business as your private lounge. A few people stepped back. A few leaned in. Board members wore the careful blankness of those, deciding which version of morality would cost them less by morning. Marisol stood absolutely still at the registration table. Poor girl. She looked like she might faint or finally breathe. Lena tried one last angle. Her favorite one. Charm sharpened by indignation. "You're humiliating yourself." There it was. The old spell. The idea that naming reality was somehow cruder than creating it. I smiled then. Not broadly. Not bitterly. Just enough. "No," I said. "I'm introducing yours." That line moved through the courtyard like a dropped glass, not loud. "Final." Richard set the papers on the podium as if he could distance himself from them physically, and moral distance might follow. It did not. One of the board members, a woman whose father had financed half the museum wing, picked up the top page before he could stop her. I watched her eyes move. Watched the exact second donor politics became scandal math. Lena understood it too. You could see the future collapsing behind her eyes. The promotion, the influence, the carefully fed image of graceful competence. All of it now contaminated by the oldest and ugliest thing in any social circle. Not sex, not even betrayal, but bad judgment wrapped in arrogance. She stepped closer and whispered, "Please." That almost hurt more than anything, not because she was sorry, because she finally sounded honest only when she was losing. I took one step back. Elise emerged from the crowd then, perfectly timed in a cream suit, holding another envelope. My attorney had a gift for theater she never admitted to possessing. She handed the envelope to Lena. "This contains formal notice," Elise said clearly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Further communication regarding financial matters should come through counsel." Richard stared at Elise, then at me, then at the pages again as though brute disbelief could unprint ink. I said nothing more. I did not need to. The room was doing the rest. I turned and walked out through the courtyard, while the jazz trio faltered into silence behind me. Outside, the night air was still hot. The valet asked if I needed my truck brought around, and I told him no. I wanted the walk. The museum sat only 6 blocks from the marina. I took them slowly through streets washed in amber light, past restaurants full of people leaning toward each other over wine and heat, and other people's future mistakes. Halfway home my phone rang. "Lena." I let it ring, then again, then a message lit the screen. "Please let me explain." I kept walking, a second message. "It isn't what you think, no. It never is, because what a liar means is always narrower, kinder, more flattering to themselves than what they actually did." By the time I reached the marina, the moon was a pale smear above the black water. I unlocked the gate, walked to the end of the main dock, and sat on a weathered bench facing the slips. Lines knocked softly against cleats. A generator hummed far off on one of the larger yachts. The tide was moving out. That mattered to me more than speeches or apologies ever could. Tide tells the truth without asking whether you can bear it. Lena came home just before midnight. I heard her car in the drive, then the front door, then heels crossing the tile with too much care. When she entered the den, I was sitting in the dark with only the lamp beside me on. Her makeup was still flawless, except for the place near her left eye where she had wiped once and then stopped. She looked beautiful, tired, dangerous, diminished. Daniel, I waited. She stayed standing. That told me she did not know whether she still belonged anywhere in the room. "It was stupid," she said. "It went too far." I said nothing. It was never supposed to become public. I laughed once at that. Quietly, "There you are," I said. "The first true sentence tonight." She flinched, then gathered herself. "It started as access. That's all. Richard opened doors. He made promises. I thought I could manage him. And when did he start managing you?" Her jaw set. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make this sound dirty." I looked at her for a long moment. "You made it dirty." "I just stopped laundering it." She sank into the chair opposite mine as though her legs had finally admitted the evening to themselves. "I did not stop loving you." Maybe she believed that. Maybe people like Lena divide themselves so expertly they mistake compartmentalization for innocence. I found I no longer cared. "Love that requires this much translation isn't love I need," I said. She looked around the room then. At the books, the framed chart, the lamp we bought from an estate sale on our honeymoon road trip, the furniture we chose when we first moved into the house and still touched each other in doorways. "What happens now?" she asked. "You move into the guest room tonight. Tomorrow your brother picks up whatever you need for the week. After that your attorney can talk to mine. You already arranged all this." "Yes." She shook her head with a kind of bleak wonder. "How long have you known?" "Long enough. And you just lived beside me." "No," I said. "I lived beside a performance. That hit." She lowered her eyes. For a second I saw the younger Lena, the one who told a broke marina manager he needed leverage, then kissed him in a parking lot with salt on both their mouths and no plan beyond the next honest hour. I lost her somewhere along the line. Maybe she lost herself first. Either way, I was done searching. She rose without another word and walked upstairs. Her hand brushed the banister the way it always had. Familiar motion. Unfamiliar person. In the weeks that followed, the town did what towns do. It fed. It speculated. It polished gossip into concern, and concern into moral commentary. Richard resigned from the museum board, citing health and travel. Lena took a leave of absence that became a departure described publicly as mutual. The junior coordinator, Marisol, kept her job after the museum director learned how much she had been carrying and for whom. Elise made sure of that. I signed papers. So did Lena. We sold nothing that mattered to the marina, and the house resolution came quicker than expected once the financial trails were laid clean. Lena tried twice more to meet in person, once for closure, once for context. Interesting word, context, as if betrayal becomes less exact when furnished properly. I declined both times. I did not hate her, that surprised me. Hate keeps a person warm in all the wrong ways. I had no use for that kind of heat. What I felt instead was colder and probably healthier. I saw her clearly. At last, no myth left, no special language, no private exceptions, just a person who wanted more doors open than one life could honestly walk through. Autumn came late that year. The first cool morning arrived with a clean blue sky and a breeze that moved across the marina in long, patient strokes. I was on the fuel dock, checking a delivery when Marisol showed up with coffee from the bakery across the bridge, and an expression that was still a little apologetic even on her good days. "You don't have to keep doing that," I said, taking the cup. "I know, but you will anyway, probably." We stood there watching a pelican dive clumsily and come up triumphant. "How are you?" she asked. It was a simple question. No caution, no hidden need. I appreciated that more than I could explain. "Better," I said. She nodded. "You seem quieter." "I was always quiet." "No," she said. "Before you seemed contained. Now you seem peaceful." That stayed with me. Contained, peaceful. There is a difference. One is a lid. The other is a horizon. That winter I repainted the den. Not because Lena had chosen the old color, though she had. Because the room needed new light. I replaced the rug, moved the chart from the wall to the hallway, and hung a weathered aerial photograph of the marina from before I bought it, back when the place was all broken piers and possibility. People came and went. Boats needed repair. Storm warnings rose and passed. Life continued doing what it does best after it has made a wreck of your plans. It offered chores, then sleep, then a morning you did not dread quite as much as the one before. Months later, on an early spring evening, I locked the office and walked the docks while the sky went copper over the water. A young couple on a rented cruiser were arguing softly about charts they did not know how to read. A father showed his daughter how to tie off a line. Someone on the far pier was laughing hard enough to bend over. The world had not ended. It had only corrected itself. And I had mistaken correction for ruin because I still believed the marriage I lost was the marriage I had. It was not. That was the gift buried inside the humiliation. Once I knew what I had actually been living in, leaving it stopped feeling like failure and started feeling like oxygen. So no, I did not get revenge the way people like to imagine revenge. No screaming in the driveway. No broken glasses. No second woman waiting in the wings to prove I could be wanted elsewhere. What I got was better. I got my own mind back, my own house back, my own sense of proportion back. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough, because she wanted a life built on access, angles, and appetite. I wanted something seaworthy. Only one of us was ever going to make it to open water. And if this story held you, subscribe to Reddit Ride, like the video, and leave a comment. That support helps the channel grow, and it helps stories like this keep finding the people who understand them.